What's going on, guys? Welcome to today's video, and today is going to be a training video where I'm going to talk about why programming for hypertrophy is so important, whether that be following a program or maybe trying to even write a program yourself. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to timestamp everything that I'm going to cover below in the description of this video, just to make it easier for you and you don't get bored, so you can fast forward to the bit that interests you. So, why is programming or following a program so important for building muscle? So, the reason for this is because you've got three different principles that you need to take into consideration when trying to train for strength, trying to train for endurance, or as we're talking about today, hypertrophy. And those three things are volume. Now, volume is load that you lift times sets times reps. Then you have also got intensity. So this is basically the load that you are lifting on the bar. So sometimes it can be a percentage of your 1 rep max. So if you were doing 100 kilos on a squat for 1 rep, then 70% of that would be 70 kilos. Or you can use something called an RPE scale to measure intensity, which means you basically give it a rating from 1 to 10 to determine how hard that set for the exercise was. Then the last thing is frequency. Now, frequency is how many times you train per week. Now, these three things are very important to discuss, because if people utilize them correctly and program them into their training, you can really maximize your gains. However, people that don't know how to utilize them correctly or program them in can not maximize the gains that they can achieve genetically without pumping themselves full of juice every week. Now, obviously, if you are a newbie to the gym, then you can see results within 1 week of weightlifting. But if you're a little bit more intermediate, more advanced, this is when you really need to know about this, or you need to be following a very good program yourself. So here we have got a graph. Now, at the bottom, you've got volume, and at the top, you've got intensity, and this line here shows time. So if you're training for 12 weeks, that's the training program. And what should happen during the time that you're training is your volume, so the amount of load times sets times reps, the total volume should go up during that time, and the intensity, the load lifted, should go down. Now, for strength training, that would be quite the other way around, but today we're talking about hypertrophy, and hypertrophy is very closely related to volume. The more volume you do, evidence out there and data shows the more hypertrophy or muscle mass is likely to happen. So this is what we would call the progressive overload period, which means over a period of time, you are progressively overloading your muscle with volume, because that's what we're trying to achieve for maximizing hypertrophy. If you think about Hercules, when he was a child, the baby calf, he carried it for a long time. Then as the years went by and that calf got bigger and bigger, so did Hercules, and he was able to get massive. So that's basically the progressive overload principle, and that is why you need to be tracking your progress regularly to achieve this. Now, we're going to talk about mistakes that people make when they are trying to maximize muscle growth. So number one would be you are always sticking to higher reps, and you're trying to get the pump on, and you're not really doing as many compound lifts as you should, and you are not ever really hitting the strength rep ranges, which is normally around 3 to 6 reps. The reason you should be doing this is because if you're sticking to the strength rep ranges now and again using something called periodization, which we'll discuss in a second, that means that you are never too far away from either rep range, which means that all your muscle fibers are gonna get hit within a phase. Now normally a training phase is every 4 weeks. Some people can stick to the same rep range every 4 weeks, and then the next 4-week block they will move on. But it's quite good, and evidence out there again does show that it's good to change it up, maybe weekly or daily. Again, that depends on how long you've been training for as well. Another mistake would be that people chop and change their exercise selection every week, and you cannot track progress like that if you're not keeping the exercises quite similar, because you are not going to be able to look back and say, okay, well I did this weight last week and this week, because you're always going to be changing the exercises, so you're not going to be able to efficiently track volume and progressively overload your muscles. Mistake number 3 people make is too many people like to train until failure. What that means is on their rep range for that set, on the last rep they would want to just not be able to do any more because it makes them feel good and it makes them feel like they are going to achieve maximum muscle mass. But that is not the case, because like we discussed before, the thing that's going to achieve that is actually volume over time. Now, volume is very different to muscle damage. Muscle damage means that you are damaging the muscle fibers, you are tearing them, and if you're doing that till failure very often, then that is going to be very fatiguing, and it's probably going to affect your performance to achieve maximum volume. That is why what people do is they would stick to a certain RPE scale. Now the RPE scale means rate of perceived exertion. So you've got 1 to 10. 1 means that you could do 9 more reps in that set. 10 means you could not perform any more reps after your given rep range, okay? Now, what you would normally see in a volume block is the majority of exercises, sets and workouts for accessory work that is not your compound lifts like deadlifts, bench and squats. The accessory work would normally be an RPE of 7 to 8 in a volume block, which means that you've got 2 reps left in the tank. Now, if you had a set of 5 to do of a certain exercise and you wanted to train until failure, then what I would advise is maybe the first 4 sets you can do an RPE 7 or 8, and on the last set maybe do something called an AMRAP, which is as many reps as possible. But you wouldn't really do this all the time, because again, we're talking about hypertrophy, so you don't need to focus on intensity and training till failure. The only thing you should focus on is volume increasing over time. I need a haircut and a shave, but now we're going to talk about programming and periodization. So periodization is basically where you are changing different rep ranges throughout a training phase, or changing different variables, whether it be weights, sets, reps, frequency of training. And programming is basically planning those things out depending on your goal. So if your goal is hypertrophy, its volume, intensity goes down. If it's strength, over time you want to program that plan to make the intensity or the load get heavier and the volume get lower. Now, I'm going to give you an example of a very basic split training frequency. You got Monday, Wednesday, Friday. This here is what we call a training phase or block. Normally a training phase would last 4 weeks. Then you might change a rep range or, sets, different variables after you've done 4 weeks. That's the norm. It's not gospel, but it tends to work quite well for most people. Now, I'm going to show you something called linear periodization. Now, what linear periodization is, that is basically where you're going to stick to the same rep range for one training phase, and then for another 4 weeks you change the rep range, and then if you are doing, say a 12-week program, then for the last 4 weeks you would change that rep range again. So basically every 4 weeks you're changing the rep ranges. Now, what that might look like is Monday, Wednesday, Friday. You do 10 reps for the first 4 weeks. Then that might change to 8 reps for the next 4 weeks. And again, if it's a 12-week program, you might do 6 reps for the last block. Now, the sweet spot for hypertrophy is normally the 8 to 12 rep range. But the reason why you might want to include some low reps in there, like 6s sometimes, is because you don't really want to get too far away from a lower rep range suitable for strength, because strength is also closely related to muscle mass. Normally, if you have a lot of muscle, your strength can improve or your lifts can get heavier over time. That is why every now and again, you don't want to spend too long in a certain rep range. Now, the problem with this linear periodization is you are going lower in reps over time, 10s, 8s, and 6s. Yes, maybe after that 12 weeks, you will go back to the 10 reps again, but it's not really adhering to the principle of volume over time. So you might want to do something called reverse linear periodization. Now, what reverse linear is, exactly the same as what I just showed you, but in reverse. So that might look like this. Instead, all it's going to be is you're just going to start with 6s first 4 weeks, next 4 weeks 8s, and the next 4 weeks 10. Again, you have to remember this is an example if you're doing 12 weeks. If it's longer than that, then you might change your rep ranges again. So maybe if I was starting off and I'd never followed a program before, then this is probably something that I would do. The training split might be full body Monday, full body Wednesday, full body Friday, doing horizontal pulls, horizontal push, vertical, and also, you know, things like squats, so getting your big rocks in place. And probably my preference if I was a beginner, starting off with the reverse linear, because you're doing 6s, 8s, 10s, and you're going up in volume. Yes, you will go back to 6s, but it's just more suitable for the training phase of hypertrophy. Now we're going to talk about another type of periodization that's called DUP, or daily undulating periodization. Now this might be better for someone who's a bit more advanced. Now what this is you're basically changing your rep ranges every workout, or you know, daily, every other day during that week. So maybe if you're advanced and you want to utilize a program, then you might do something like this: lower, upper, 4 days a week. Now, the first lower session might be 6s, the second lower might be 8s, the first upper might be 6s, and the second upper might be sets of 8. Now, let's say, for example, again, this is just an example, if you had a 12-week block, then stick to this undulation pattern for the first 4 weeks, because you don't want to start with too high reps, because if you stall, then how are you going to adjust from there, and how is your volume going to increase? So you need to take that into account when you're planning your training program. You need to end up starting or going back, I would say, in the lower rep range, so then over time you can stick to the principle of progressive overload. So the first 4 weeks, stick to this undulation pattern, and then what you could do, maybe just change these to 8s and these to 10s, and then for the third block you might change these to 10s and change these to 12s. Now, maximum reps, you know, for hypertrophy, it's probably around, you know, 15, 16 reps. Now, there's a lot of evidence out there showing that DUP is probably the most effective for maximizing muscle growth. The reason for this is because you are targeting different rep ranges and different muscle fibers on a weekly basis. And also, Dr. Brad Schoenfeld, Mr. Hypertrophy, has confirmed that your muscles, according to research and evidence, do not need any longer than 48 hours to recover. But again, this is the kind of approach that I would use if you're more intermediate and advanced. Maybe you've hit a brick wall and you're not progressing. Now, when you are programming, you want to stick to lower rep ranges first. The reason for this is because over time, you want to stick to the principle of progressive overload to maximize hypertrophy. So if you're starting off with ridiculously high reps straight away, you're going to find it very difficult to maintain that volume because you're just going to feel fatigued. So start off low first, and if you have the time, why not utilize it to maximize this? So now I want to quickly talk about progression, how you can track your progression over time and know that you are progressively overloading and maximizing your muscle gains. So 1RM, percentage of 1RM, what you can do is you can test your 1 rep max on a big lift, such as a squat, for example. Your 1RM could be 100 kilos, and then I might ask you to do 70% of that for 8 reps, which would be 70 kilos. And then maybe in a few weeks' time, you could test your squat 1RM again. If that's gone higher, then obviously the 70% of that 1RM would be higher as well, which means from the previous week's lifts, you would have progressed over time. You can also do something called a deload week, which would mean, for example, if you were doing a lot of volume, week 1, you were doing 6, week 1 you were doing sets of 6, week 2 sets of 8, week 3 sets of 10, week 4 sets of 12, and that 4th week you couldn't progress from there. What you would do is you would go back to the reps you were doing that very first week, which was 6s, and whatever weight you were using with those 6s the first time, you would drop the load by 10%. You can also progress with frequency, which means that if you were doing, say, 3 days a week, you could add another day after the first training phase. This would be pretty hard if you were training 6 days a week, but obviously if you were training at a minimum 3, then you added another day, your volume would automatically increase without having to add any sets or any more load or reps, because you could keep it the same and just add another day. So you can also add more load, add more weight to certain lifts. Obviously, that would be amazing if you could do that every single exercise, every set, every week. But unless you're pumping yourself full of Hulk juice all the time, then that's not going to happen. So what you have to do is you have to make adjustments to one of the variables now and again. Don't just add more load, more reps, more sets, because that will actually do more damage than good to your performance in the gym. So what you want to do is every now and again, certain exercises, you might just keep the sets the same, add another rep. You might add another set, keep the reps, the weight the same, or every now and again, depending on how you're feeling on the exercise, you might want to increase the load. Try it, see how you feel, test the RPE scale, do something like that. Again, I guess I just covered reps and sets. Last one is something called AMRAPs. Now, AMRAPs is basically like if you get a wrap and you put some salad and a little bit of ham, but then you take the H away and you eat that wrap, then once it's in your stomach, that food then becomes something called an AMRAP. Obviously, if you have the intellectual intelligence, you will realize that that was probably not a very funny joke. AMRAPs, on a serious note, means that you are doing as many reps as possible. Now, again, this isn't going to be ideal all the time because we did say that damage is not related to hypertrophy. So if you're doing AMRAPs every set, every exercise until failure, then your volume is probably going to decrease over time. Now, AMRAPs means that you could do as many reps as possible. Say if you were training Monday, Wednesday, Friday, you could do an AMRAP on the last set of every exercise on that Friday if you are resting over the weekend. So it's normally good to do a lot of AMRAPs maybe the day before you rest because you're doing a lot of damage. That is it, guys. Thanks very much for watching. I hope it helped. If it did, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't done already, subscribe. Take care, and I will see you lovely people next time.